Today, stocks surged to record highs after President Trump caved and finally signed a new COVID relief package into law last night, extending unemployment benefits for 14 million people. Plus, although tensions have risen between the US and China, the two global superpowers seem to agree on one thing: regulating tech giants. And finally, Wonder Woman sets a record for highest box office sales under pandemic conditions. I'm Mackenzie Sigalos, and this is CNBC After Hours. It's another one of those days on Wall Street. All three major indices closing at record levels. Stocks rose today after President Trump gave investors what they wanted: hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID relief, meant to bridge the economy to the post-pandemic world. Stimulus checks, unemployment extensions, loans for small businesses, all of that is now on the way. But some stocks are still feeling the pressure. Take Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. That stock, it's down 13% since Christmas Eve, after Chinese regulators announced that they launched an antitrust investigation into the tech conglomerate. The news came on the heels of an increasing and largely unexpected push by the Chinese to rein in some of their biggest and most powerful companies. It sound familiar? Well, since October, the US federal government has sued both Facebook and Google, which is also facing lawsuits from two different coalitions of state attorneys general. Now, let's be clear. What's going on in China is not exactly the same. It's complex, and some of it is wrapped up in the relationship between the Communist Party and billionaire Alibaba founder Jack Ma. You should check out CNBC.com for the full story. But the headline narrative is similar to the flurry of antitrust activity that we've seen in the US. And as far as some experts are concerned here at home, the forces gunning for big tech may be just getting started. Kevin Arquette used to be the general counsel for the Federal Trade Commission, which is the agency that just sued Facebook. Kevin's tenure predates these lawsuits, but he told us to expect more scrutiny of these tech giants in 2021.
The climate in Washington is as aggressive as I've ever seen in terms of challenging technology platforms. A report that was issued by the House of Representatives and the several senators have introduced legislation to have more aggressive antitrust, and the agencies, obviously both of them, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and they've brought actual litigations against high-tech platforms. For the government to succeed in a monopoly case, they have to show that in an overall sense that there's been a harm to consumers. And that is a very extensive undertaking. With respect to several of these platforms, the product they offer to the consumer is free. So there isn't the type of short-term price effect that we're typically accustomed to that forms the basis of an antitrust case. Here, the harm is to the consumer. It is a non-price type of harm. It has to do with the quality of what's offered to the consumer when these platforms don't have to compete. And more specifically, these harms can involve misuse of consumer privacy data. It can be using aggregated seller data to prefer the platform's own downstream products. The practices that the federal government is challenging with respect to Facebook and Google, which is essentially that they deny access to their platform to would-be competitors or discriminate against them, is conduct that's also been alleged to have been engaged in by Amazon. And so one would think that the Federal Trade Commission is going to look very closely at Amazon practices. Well, I think it's no secret that the government has been quite reluctant to bring cases in the high technology space. The argument has been that to go against it is to challenge innovation, and the government certainly doesn't want to be seen as doing that. And then I think with respect to most of these platforms, one of their arguments will be, yes, we're big, but we're not big because we did anything wrong. We're big because when there were choices out there, consumers chose us, and they use our platforms because that's what they want. In monopolization cases, the courts acknowledge that the most likely and most effective relief is divestiture. In the recent case initiated by the Federal Trade Commission, they've acknowledged they may seek divestitures in terms of Facebook, that they might have to undo the mergers they did of WhatsApp and Instagram several years earlier. So even though it sounds draconian, it is much more likely to work once you establish illegal conduct than behavioral remedies, because behavioral remedies just tell people you can't do this again. Well, how do you really enforce that? technology is so complex that companies may be able to discriminate against rivals in ways that are largely unknown to the public or to enforcers. So divestiture may well be the only result that makes sense.
Okay, let's get to our sound check. Here's a roundup of the day's biggest action and what the top newsmakers and business leaders had to say on CNBC's airwaves.
We are going to see one of the worst months in this nation's history in January. There is no doubt about that. People are traveling from different places. These are people from different household bubbles who are spending time with one another, with different generations of people. That is the concern here. It's not the sitting on the plane that we're worried about. And that mixing of people is what leads to spread of this virus.
I think what the president was doing is sort of throwing down a marker for his next political race, possibly, and say, look, I don't think this was enough money.
It wasn't a classic recession brought on by higher interest rates or tighter financial conditions. It was brought on by a natural disaster. And we know that once the disaster is over, supply, the ability to produce goods and services, springs back to where it was before.
I've got about half of my union right now without getting a paycheck. And now that this has become law, they're going to be recalled to their jobs. They're going to get a paycheck, get connected back to their health care, have retirement payments and everything else that comes with that, allow them to pay taxes, spend back into the economy. This is our jobs. This is our health care. So it's a big deal.
All right, this pandemic holiday season has been one unlike any other, and the way we shopped for gifts, well, it was no exception. More dollars than ever before were spent online, which then led to shipping delays and caused logistics giants like UPS and FedEx to impose shipping limits on some retailers. Now, this shopping shift is now leading to a change in how many gifts are returned. CNBC's Frank Holland can explain.
Returns on the day after Christmas, they were 230% higher than the average day in 2020. That's according to online return firm Returnly. Their new report, it makes a case that December 26th is now the busiest day of the year for returns, as opposed to the conventional wisdom, it's a day in early January. Also, they say different categories are seeing a dramatic shift in buying and also returning habits. For example, underwear and intimates seeing a 134% increase in returns year over year from Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales. Furniture up 36%. These are categories where customers, they're still kind of adjusting to shopping online, according to the CEO of Returnly. His research also shows that work from home is a major factor in the 100% increase in return times.
Shoppers are now taking up to 20 days to return merchandise. They change their habits. They no longer go to the office, so they no longer commute and run these errands as they go to work.
According to CBRE, the average return loses almost 60% of its value when you send it back because of the time it takes to get back on the shelf and, of course, logistics cost. But Returnly says this year, direct-to-consumer brands, think Allbirds and Third Love, they've actually increased repeat buyers and they've gained market share because their reverse logistics are more efficient and the returns are faster.
Okay, time for today's numbers round. We'll start with 3. Just 3 stocks account for more than half of the S&P's gains this year. Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon. That's according to a senior analyst at S&P Dow Jones Indices. The report comes as investors look ahead to their 2021 strategies and weigh putting fresh money into stocks that have become very expensive, but also have proven to be a winning bet. Tech is 2020's best performer of the 11 sectors in the S&P 500. And keep in mind that that doesn't include Amazon's gains, since the e-commerce giant is part of the consumer discretionary sector. Next is $16.7 million. Wonder Woman 1984 made $16.7 million in North American box office sales in its opening weekend. Now, that's the biggest haul of any movie that was released during the pandemic. But remember, Wonder Woman is a Warner Media film. And earlier this month, well, Warner Media made some pretty big enemies in Hollywood when it announced that it would release its films on its HBO Max streaming service the same day that it came out in theaters. Wonder Woman 1984 was the studio's first go at this experimental strategy. And as far as how many people streamed the film at home, well, that's unclear. The studio gave some numbers, but not a holistic picture at the percentage of overall subscribers who watched the movie. And finally, $900 billion. While President Trump signed the $900 billion COVID relief package into law yesterday, well, Congress could still vote to hike the direct payment amounts to $2,000 instead of $600, a measure that Trump himself has requested. The House votes this evening, and if it passes, it goes to the Republican-controlled Senate, which may strike it down. Catch all the latest developments on stimulus checks by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. That's it for After Hours, but we'll be back here in our home office tomorrow and Wednesday with our final shows of the year, so please be sure to catch us then.